to the Out of Bounds Show on ESPN 105.9 The Zone. We're excited to have Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann join us live in studio again. He has been in here with us before, and we've had him on over the phone too. Always a ton of fun to talk sports and politics because they definitely mesh, and there's definitely crossover there. They called us. Lieutenant Governor and his staff called us with a little renovation. We have a golf simulator going in. We just got it last week. We're still putting it up, but it's going to be awesome. Good morning, Lieutenant Governor.
Good morning, Bo. It's good to see you again, man.
How you doing?
You've grown up since you started.
I know. Crazy.
We've been talking about children and grandchildren and where everybody is, and you've been growing up and very successful. So congratulations.
You've got kids that are empty nesters, and I appreciate that, by the way.
Right.
And I'm an empty nester, and you've been there. It's totally crazy because you run around with them for years and years to the ballpark and dance recitals.
I know.
And then they're gone.
They're gone, and then all your friends will leave with them because you were on, we were president of the Booster Club. All our friends were friends that had, kids at school. And then they're gone. It's like you have to start all over again. It's but you've got two in college, so you're going to have to work for a while.
I am. And I went to school with your kids.
Right.
I grew up with your family many years ago. So, and that was a ton of fun. Spent a lot of time on Sheffield Drive. That's for sure. All right. So,
we've had a massive change in the last 72 hours, Bo.
NIL takes up a lot of our people want to talk about NIL.
Yeah, well, let me give you like the Cook's tour here.
Okay,
and then
great.
We'll come back and then we start with questions and everything. But this Arizona swimmer named House decided that he wasn't getting enough money, and so he sued the NCAA. And the NCAA had a California judge that ruled last Friday night, just a few hours ago, that there was a settlement of $2.8 billion. Now, $2.8 billion is a lot of money, whether you're from Warren County, wherever you're from. And so they figured that by 22% of the revenue that ticket sales and TV revenue got. So they came up with that money, $2.8 billion, that the NCAA has to pay, which means we have to pay it through our tickets, actually. So however you are, TV revenue. So there are 19,000 athletes that are going to be paid this money. And some of them could get $15,000, some of them could get $280,000 based upon whether they played, what the revenue was of their particular school and whatnot. But the average of this settlement is $91,000 a year for these young men that played these sports, or young women as well.
Okay.
The lawyers did good on this, Bo, as they always do. They get $484 million as part of their fee.
Wow.
So I assume they'll be able to pay for their own ticket now. So anyway, this money doesn't yet cover the NIL portion. This is about the settlement of the revenue for these kids. If you remember, Mississippi was, I think, one of the second or third case, and I helped draft the legislation for NIL 2 or 3 years ago. So this settlement really covers up to like 2023. When we started NIL to start making these kids be able to do their name, image, and likeness and get paid for it. So that's when this settlement cuts off, because kids, young athletes started to get money for that. So the NIL part is left out, and I'll come back to that in a second. But we all drafted legislation. In fact, Senator Boyd particularly and I helped with this one. We drafted legislation this year to put Mississippi in the forefront of name, image, and likeness. And it covered revenue sharing and some other things that are now covered by this lawsuit. So we'll have to redo state law. So in order to do this, and this is where it's going to get really unusual. You all have a lot of time to talk about this. They set up something called a College Sports Commission, okay? And it's going to be run by the Big Four, the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, and all the Big Four, the Atlantic Coast Conference. And,
Big Ten.
The Big Ten, all the Big Four will run it. So the College Sports Commission will make sure that nobody spends more than $20.5 million per year. Now, that's indexed for inflation, so it goes up like 4% a year, and I think it can rounds out $30-something million a year for these young athletes. And when that happens, the $20.5 million a year, these young athletes will be able to receive that money. And I want to get into that in a minute with how that's going to really affect Mississippi. In addition to that, they set up something called NILGO, which covers the NIL payments to individuals. And the reason they did that, they didn't want an overlap. They didn't want big-time donors given to name, image, and likeness to really pay the players, like actually, quite frankly, what we've been doing right now.
Sure.
So to stop that, excuse me, they started this NILGO, and that's supposed to regulate NIL payments. So you've got a new college sports commission you'll be able to talk about, and an NILGO. It's supposed to govern this other part. So what happens, our bill, the state's bill, was Senate Bill 2515, I think, and we will go back and review that this year and decide how this has affected the state law and whether or not it overrules our law, and what our athletes will need to do to comply with that, because we really drafted the law in anticipation of the NIL like we did. This was an amendment to a state law 2 years ago. So now you get down to what does this really mean? So this is where we're into prognostication and not necessarily fact.
Sure.
But the NCAA is now really economically hurt. Excuse me. They no longer control the money, which, as you know, is a big deal. That's where. So they basically will be talking about eligibility or rules. Do you kick off from the 35 or the 40?
Sure.
These different rules that we have in college sports, and betting. They'll say if you bet on the sports, they can kick you out, that kind of thing. So the problems with this will come with a couple of things. One, how do you spend the money? So we got $20.5 million to spend. This starts July 1st, so we're like less than 30 days from this kicking off. So, for example, how would you spend $20 million?
The majority of it in football, and then men's basketball, and then you got to get into the non-revenue sports and figure that out, because football, as you know, drives the train.
Mm-hmm.
So that I can pay for men's golf and women's tennis and track and field, because they don't wonderful sports, but they don't make any money.
And you're dead right about that. There's a question of whether they'll continue or not, and particularly because our Olympic sports, so many of them come out of our college athletes. And you're right. The gymnastics, women's gymnastics, which has been a highlight for the United States for a number of years.
No question.
That's not a revenue maker.
Oh.
Swimming, tennis, you get in track and field. All these others are not revenue making. So if you had your 20.5, the first few comments that I saw online were to pay like 15 to 20% of it would actually go to basketball. And then, so you're right, 2.5, maybe $4 million. So then you've got, 15 to $16 million left for football, but you've got to cover your baseball. Like Mississippi State is probably phenomenal. Both Ole Miss and State won national championships.
Sure.
So they got a phenomenal baseball team. So Southern Mississippi's been in it, regional core. They
live there.
We're just like really blessed with baseball in Mississippi. So they'll want to continue that. So you put $2 million in that, you put $3 million in that. So all of a sudden, there's very little money left for tennis. And like Ole Miss's golf.
Men's golf
won.
Team, unbelievable.
They got wone the individual.
And women's.
So it's in their women's, and the women's softball made the final 8. So it's just amazing. Where are we going to allocate these funds? And I think you'll see the athletic directors really scratching their head this morning trying to figure out, okay, where am I going to spend it? The next thing that I think is probably coming is going to be collective bargaining. Mm-hmm. Now, when I've talked with this about the various athletic directors over the last few years, I kept saying, these really are employees. When you get down to it, what you're doing is paying these people to be employees. Right. We don't want them to be employees. It would mean they could unionize, and, Northwestern and some others have tried to unionize over the years. And so they can unionize everything. Well, we don't want to do that. We don't want to deal with unions. Well, if you look at professional baseball and NFL, that's how they've dealt with this.
Right.
For example, you wouldn't have any free agency here. There wouldn't be guys going around. As you know, Coach Kiffin's already said he doesn't like the process anyway. But if you get into a union deal, then you would have negotiating where you'd probably have more people staying at one institution, and you'd be paying them to do that. So I think that's probably what's on the horizon here for everyone. In fact, Tennessee, their guy, athletic director is White. Danny White, you may remember him, played quarterback for Dallas. But they're talking about going to collective bargaining as quick as they can. The other part is what happens to the federal law. Does the federal law come in and override all my NIL that I drafted? Senator Boyd and I drafted this last year. Are they going to take over all of that? Is this NILGO going to set the terms? How do we deal with that? And then really the weakness of the NCAA means, does it exist anymore?
I think the big conferences will leave.
Yeah.
Eventually.
I think,
Governor, I think
more likely that's going to occur now that they've been weakened.
I think the SEC and Big Ten will start the process, and they'll leave at some point. They'll leave the NCAA and create their own entity.
I foresee that, and it may be an entity to negotiate a labor agreement.
Absolutely.
When you get through it, and private equity is sniffing around.
Well, look
here.
what happened this morning. Private equity just got into 2 athletic departments already this morning. It was just announced 30 minutes ago.
I'm not surprised because they'll raise cash and of course want to make obviously they'll want to make money out of it. But you've got to determine this NIL still will be a major draw for these young men and women that are playing these sports. Will the NIL contracts will still be a massive part, and there's room for private equity in that. Then you get into, are they going to, if there's a collective bargaining agreement, how are they, who's representing who on all of that. So there's a lot of opportunities and much change coming to sports. I expect Nick Saban somewhere has just come out of Mass. He goes to Mass every day. He's probably come out of Mass and said a thank you prayer.
Yeah.
That he's not
for
there
already.
Because I'm out of that.
That's in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, I know, man. And I'm so glad I won all my championships, and now I'm going to Florida.
That's right.
Whatever.
That's right. Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann on the Out of Bounds Show, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN, walking us through what's happening at the state level in the legislature. And then he's laying out some scenarios that could happen both with collective bargaining, NCAA, and as the governor said, at the federal level, you don't know what they're going to rule. So
I was hopeful. Tuberville is going to run for governor in Alabama, and he was taking the lead in this. And I was really hopeful that as he got into his second term up there, that he would be able to, cobble together.
Right.
There's some conflicting here because the Big East doesn't have any football,
right,
as such. So they got $20 million they can play on basketball.
Rick Pitino at St. John's. They've already come out. They're going to spend 19 or 20 million,
right,
Governor.
So their starting guys are going to make $2 million. Their starting 5 will make $2 million a year to play for St. John's.
Think about that. St. John's and Villanova.
Georgetown. Look at all of them.
Yeah, he's right. You look at the teams like Villanova and Georgetown and St. John's. They're going to allocate all their money. And Rick Pitino has the CEO of Body Armor, who's a billionaire, who said whatever you want to do. So it's going to be interesting.
It's going to be. Well, like I say, it's $2 million for the starting 5. That's 10, and so they still got $10 million to spend on the backups.
That's right.
So we're in the SEC. We've been, obviously tremendously competitive, particularly these last few years in basketball. But we're going to be struggling to do that with somebody that can make, when they allocate $4 million to basketball at Mississippi State. Well, these other guys are allocating $20 million.
Right.
So who do you want to play for?
Right.
Rick Pitino at St. John's at $2 million a year, or $250,000 back where we are. So there'll be, I think there'll be some leveling there. It's going to be hard for them to come back. And
you're going to have coaches in the athletic departments, Governor, that are going to be fighting for their share. I mean, I was listening to Kentucky Sports Talk Radio this morning, and they came out and said that this is unheard of in the SEC, as you know. It looks like they're going to skew more towards basketball when majority of the teams in our conference are going to put more into football. But Kentucky's different. Yeah. Well, you look at Mississippi State, and of course they got just this tremendous facility, and they just hired a coach that's been winning everywhere. He was, by the way, he was at Notre Dame at one point. Notre Dame alum.
all
he
my
and
guys
Veneri,
are doing good.
They did a great job at Notre Dame over
They did.
a 10-year stretch.
Look, they couldn't even practice till March or April.
I know. It was snow on the ground.
I know. They had to come down here to play all their spring games because it was too cold where they were. So they did good, and Mississippi State's obviously competing and will compete strongly in that as Southern and Ole Miss. So those coaches meetings are going to be antagonistic. I need $1 million more for my guy, and we can win the national championship. And no, I need a quarterback, and
that's right.
It's going to be pretty interesting for Carter and all the rest.
Well, Keith Carter and Zach Selman, it's going to be a tremendous challenge. And like you said, is it going to hold? With the judges ruling out of which you were referencing, right. The judges ruling out of the San Francisco Bay Area. She's been kind of in this for a long time. You mentioned the swimmer and the O'Bannon basketball player from the 90s, UCLA. But if and you know more about it than I do after an awesome, prestigious legal career, what happens if the Senate and Congress up in the federal level does something, and then what happens if and when the SEC and Big Ten pull out of the NCAA?
Yeah, what's most likely, first of all, this is not going to be appealed. So the NCAA has beat this down to where they think they can settle for $2.8 billion. So they've either got the money or made it from March Madness or whatever. So they're going to allocate this fund. So we're not appealing this decision. It's going to stick. In Congress, they have been lethargic about doing anything about this because, just like I said, the Big East and all of those schools up there are not going to be, they're going to be for the SEC having to water down their basketball. That doesn't bother them at all.
No.
So I don't know that they'll get involved in this. The only way they would be to give an antitrust exemption. And then the big question is what happens to Title IX? So if you give $3 million to boys basketball, you need to give $3 million to women's basketball. And without an exemption, then you're going to find yourself back in court under Title IX.
I think they'll get an exemption. I think they'll leave the NCAA and get an exemption.
If they get the exemption, then things will break even faster.
Okay.
Then, because the exemption will allow them to allocate better. Right now, I don't know how they handle that.
No. All right. So $20.5 million is the budget, and we're going to see how schools, whether it's Ole Miss and Keith Carter, Zach Selman and Mississippi State, among others, or Notre Dame, Governor's alma mater, how they decide to do this. Of course, and then you got private schools, as you know, Duke, Notre Dame, Stanford, among others, that can, they can run their numbers.
Well, SMU, for example, didn't even take any money to get in the ACC. They forfeited all their revenue. They got so much money in Dallas, they really didn't care about the
They raised like several $100 million that.
Yeah, I think it was 200.
What a prestigious. Your daughter went to SMU.
She did. But we didn't get any of that.
Great school, but they're serious about. They had a great year. They went to the college football playoff.
They were a very good team, and you can anticipate they're going to spend a whole bunch of money now.
Heck yeah, they are.
It's a fantastic school there academically and whatnot. But all of that being said, this is not the final chapter, Bo. No, this is the next step forward. I think if I had to guess, I think you're right. We'll end up with the Big Four having their own league of some sort, and I think we'll end up with a collective bargaining. And if we don't get an exemption from Title IX, then all these, I'm not going to say they're minor sports because track and field, I've always been interested in that, and others, those will all fade away at the collegiate level just by lack of funding.
They'll have to go to club level type sports.
Right, which is really sad because part of collegiate athletics is the fact that your next door neighbor is a pole vaulter. Well, at Ole Miss, they won a gold medal.
Yeah.
So, you've got these guys, your next door neighbor won the golf championship.
Sure.
That's a big thing.
Heck yeah.
I mean, he's not, someone special. He's just somebody that's in part of your community. And you talk about him and you see him in later life. And it's part of the culture of going to an academic institution.
It's important.
Is the relationships between all these people that are good basketball players. They end up having to get a job like everybody else does. And so you end up having those
True.
kinds of relationships. And when you just limit it down to maybe 3 sports, it just doesn't seem to be the same university, the way you'd look at a university concept from a cultural standpoint.
Right. Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann on the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone, laid out where we are, but as the governor said, there's still more. I mean, this is nuanced, and it's like they're in a field with a bunch of mines, and we don't know exactly where it's going.
Yeah.
And but I do think the SEC and the Big Ten will break away. That both conference presidents gave their conference commissioners the authority to leave the NCAA within the last few months. Now, if and when they'll do it, we'll see, Governor Hosemann. But very quietly in March, our SEC presidents met, and they voted to give Commissioner Sankey the autonomy and the power to leave the NCAA if they feel that is what is best for the conference. And the Big Ten did it about 30 or 60 days before. So that was kind of...
They're what they call in the law business laying the predicate.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is they're getting set to do that. But I think they will probably hang together until such time as they can get the antitrust stuff from Washington, if they can ever get it.
I agree. Thank you so much for coming in. I know y'all had a very active and interesting session.
We did, and I'm glad it's over. So
I know, and then everybody got back together again.
It's time to go. We've done all of that, and so now we're ready to get to it. We've got some special elections coming this year for some of our senators, which a decision made by a person other than me. I thought our stuff was right. I thought the federal courts were unconstitutional in what they did to Mississippi, but sometimes that's a longer story.
Right. Well, thank you. I'm glad your family's doing well.
Everybody's doing great.
Thanks for your service to the state of Mississippi. Second term?
Yeah, we're doing pretty good right now. We're on a roll. We're paying off debt and funding teachers, and that's always good.
I love hearing it, and I hope you have a great summer with your family.
Thank you very much. You too.
Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann on the Out of Bounds Show, 105.9 The Zone ESPN. I think we're going to have to get another update like mid-fall from Governor Hosemann because this thing is never-ending, ongoing. There'll be other decisions that are made. He's right on the collective bargaining. And then we've got private equity coming into play. They just grabbed a chunk of 2 athletic departments this morning. We'll see how many more. I think it's a group called Elevate. That's a huge private equity firm. And there's also talk that Mississippi State and Ole Miss are at least exploring what that looks like if someone comes in and pumps in $400 or $500 million. But here's the deal. They get to take, as the governor knows, they get to take 30 or 40% or whatever that is. So you got to be careful. Have a great summer. Tell your family and kids I said hello. I know you're having fun with the grandkids. And Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann on the Out of Bounds Show. It will be on Spotify and Apple Podcast, uploaded in the next hour if you missed anything on our NIL discussion. And our state has been on the forefront of doing things that will help Mississippi State and Ole Miss and Southern Miss as this thing continues to evolve. Have a great Monday. Be careful out there with the weather. We'll be right back here tomorrow at 7 a.m. on ESPN 105.9 The Zone.